Welcome to Big Dave's Dream Contracts. Just coming back from a walk in the park before I get the barbecue going. I just thought I'd share with you one of my dream contracts of my career. And so it was 1997 and I went to Australia, spent a month touring the USA beforehand, and arrived in Sydney and realised that I'd blown virtually all of my money, didn't have any money left. So I think I had about $1,000 to my name, or £1,000, it wasn't a lot. So I stayed with some friends, and back then you had to go to internet cafes to register your details with the job agencies and sort your CV out. And so go to these internet cafes, do that, maybe have a coffee if I actually had the money, and then basically go home and sit by a landline, because they wouldn't allow us to have mobiles back then, because you had to, in Australia, you had to have a contract that was something like over 18 months, the mobile network contract. So of course, if you're staying for a year on a 1-year holiday visa, then that's just not possible. And I pointed that out to the people in the mobile shops, and they just weren't interested. Computer says no. So I had to basically go home and sit by the phone, waiting for it to ring. And I remember just going and getting loads of videos out back then and catching up on all the films I hadn't seen. And it was about August time, I think, in Sydney. So that was sort of winter time, and it wasn't that cold, but it was a bit wet and dreary some days. But within a couple of weeks, I got a few telephone interviews or face-to-face interviews. And basically within a few weeks, it turned out that I had 2 offers. So I had 2 contract offers in Sydney. One was for Sydney Water, and the second one was for the Australian Stock Exchange, the ASX. So I weighed up both of those contracts, of course, and basically I was sort of swayed by the fact that it was the stock exchange, Australian Stock Exchange in Sydney. I just thought that, in my gut, is the right thing to go for. So that's the contract I took. And it was fantastic, because it was a great place to work. Straight away there was this, I had a good work ethic anyway, I wanted to do a good job, but I remember my boss saying to me that just slow things down a little bit, because you're really eager and keen to do a good job. And because she had worked in the UK as well, and she was Australian, but she just said the people here will be a little bit more chilled, they'll be a lot more chilled. And so you coming in and doing all this great work, it wasn't that I was going to upset people, but she just said you don't need to try so hard. And that was just like, how amazing is that to hear, that you don't need to try so hard, you don't need to work so hard. And I was earning $650 a day, which at the time was about £400. It was about 1.5, I think, the exchange rate back then. So it wasn't fantastic rate. I think I was on 400 or 500 quid back home, but it was really good. And $650 in Australia would buy you the equivalent of £650 in the UK. So it was I was basically quids in, and I was staying with friends on a sofa in Sydney, so I wasn't shelling out for rent initially, and life was just fantastic. And I remember coming out at lunchtime, I'll never forget, was coming out at lunchtime of the ASX, the stock exchange. You had just like a absolute myriad of food courts and food places, and I swear the food was just, it just seemed like it was fantastic quality, even sandwich bars and places like that. But obviously lots of Asian influence as well, from Japan and Singapore and Malaysia. And I just remember you had this choice of food, which was amazing. But within 10 minutes of where I was working, I could just walk down to Circular Quay. So Circular Quay, if you've not heard of it or not been there, is where you've got the Sydney Opera House. So I'd basically look out, and the Sydney Opera House was on my right, and then I'd look over to the left, and you've got the Sydney Harbour Bridge. and you could basically sit on benches there, have your lunch, watch the ferries taking people to the zoo and off to Manly and all this sort of stuff. I remember sitting there vividly just thinking, I'm just so grateful for this. I'm so lucky to be able to work in the centre of Sydney, earning decent money in this gorgeous weather. And it was just fantastic. I worked there for about 4 months, I think it was. And in the money that I earned in that 3 or 4 months paid for the whole year's trip in Australia. The whole year of travelling around, you know, hiring cars, you know, swimming with whale sharks, all that sort of stuff, not skimping on anything, not doing it like a backpacker. So it was absolutely fantastic. So that's Big Dave's dream contract. I've got to go now because my kids are coming. I've got to say goodbye quickly. See ya, bye.